Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you a first look at a brand new lens from Sigma. And this is for mirrorless bodies. This is the newest in the DN series, which is designed for mirrorless bodies. In this case, I'm going to be reviewing a Sony E-mount version. This lens is exciting because it's the second entry in a newer series that Sigma actually launched in 2016, where they began to create, rather than some of their early mirrorless lenses, which I've also reviewed if you'd like to take a look at that review here, but those were smaller kind of f2.8 lenses that were kind of less extreme, I should say, maybe in their optical design. Nice compact lenses with a lot of great attributes, but of course f2.8, particularly on APS-C, is not a particularly wide maximum aperture. And so in 2016, they launched the 30mm f1.4 DN lens, which I'm actually videoing on right now. And I use the lens all the time because it's just a very practical lens. And it's also, of course, exciting because it has a much wider maximum aperture of f1.4. Now, this lens is the second in kind of this newer series, and it's also a very interesting focal length because it's a 16mm focal length, which in this case on Sony APS-C corresponds to a very important wide-angle focal length of 24mm. And so, a 24mm equivalent f1.4 lens is very interesting indeed. And so we're going to take a first look at this lens today, at its build, its design, give you a little bit of information about it, and then towards the end, I'll show you a few of the early photos that I've been taking with the lens as well. So just a quick look inside the box. I'm not really going to do an unboxing video. You deserve a little bit better than that. But just give you a look inside here. I do want to note one thing that I have noted, which are the very first of such lenses that I have ever seen. And that is with the 30mm f1.4 DC, the first in kind of this new mirrorless lineup from Sigma. And then in this 16mm f1.4. These are the first Sigma lenses of any kind that I have seen come without an actual lens case. And so I do have to give Sigma a little bit of a demerit on that point, because even the cheaper original lenses in their DN series, the f2.8 variants, they all came with nice little cases. And so, I like those cases. I'm sorry, it's kind of a deal for me. So I'm not crazy to see that, but I am excited about the lens. And so as you can see, this lens has a very similar look to its predecessor, the 30mm f1.4 DC DN lens. However, you can see that the new lens has grown a little bit. And of course, it's a more demanding focal length than 30mm. And so 30mm, of course, is it's on an APS-C Sony E-mount. It is a equivalent of a 45mm full frame lens. And so, a kind of a very popular focal length for just general purpose shooting, kind of a normal. This, of course, corresponds exactly to the very important traditional focal length of 24mm, which makes this more of a traditional wide angle option, which, by the way, there really hasn't been a lot of great primes for Sony mirrorless that I have found that correspond to that. There are some manual focus options like from Rokinon, and the 12mm, for example, is an excellent lens. There's also a 12mm from Zeiss in the Tuit line, but not a lot of options. And so this focal length here, 16mm or 24mm equivalent, is to me a really important one and a very exciting one. And so a couple of things I do want to note about this lens that makes it stand out even from the predecessor, and that is that you may or may not be able to see here, but there is a little rubber gasket here. This is, unlike the predecessor here, this actually does claim some moisture resistance, some weather sealing. However, like a lot of Sigma releases outside of, say, the Sport series, they use limited language in describing that. So think of it more as being kind of splash proof as opposed to something you want to be out in a heavy rain with for an extended period. But as you can see, a beautiful looking lens here that really looks and feels, pretty much identical to the Art series on their, for full frame or APS-C in DSLRs. It's basically all the same kind of materials. It actually, I will say that in some ways it actually feels a hair more premium than this lens. Not that there is anything wrong with the 30mm. I think it has a nice build, but I don't know, there's just something about the build on this particular one that feels a little bit more premium. So the 30mm f1.4 was 9.35 ounces or 265 grams. So actually quite a light lens, even though it's a little bit physically larger than some of the other lenses in the series. It's actually still quite a compact lens. This newer lens, of course, is bigger basically in every dimension. It's 14.29 ounces or 405 grams. So basically about 5 additional ounces or 150 grams is the difference in size. It moves to a 67mm front filter thread here, and so that's a very common size. I don't mind that. And I will note also that something I always like on some Sigma lens hoods, it's not on this one, however, that there is a bit of a rubberized surface here, right? And it just gives you a little extra grip right in the place where you would be likely to be, kind of mounting or unmounting the lens hood. And so a nice little extra touch there. Now, in terms of some of the other dimensions there, the lens itself is, this one is a little under 3 inches. It's 73.3 millimeters. This new lens is a little over 3.5 inches. It's 92 millimeters. And so, as I've noted, it's physically larger, but that's, of course, the nature of the more difficult focal length. It's also considerably more complex in terms of the optical formula. This, first lens in this series was 9 elements and 7 groups. A pretty straightforward, simple optical formula. This is 16 elements and 13 groups, and so very close to being twice as complex. And so we'll see how that plays out in terms of the real-world performance from the lens, but probably a necessity in trying to compensate for the additional challenges when it comes to things like, distortion and flare resistance that are innately a part of a design of a 24mm lens here, or 24mm equivalent, I should say. In terms of the maximum magnification, neither one of these lenses is a kind of a big wow. This is, kind of a pretty close to the standard of a 50mm type lens, and so it's around 0.1213 times. This new one is even worse. Basically, it is a 0.10 times, and so don't really expect to be doing a lot of close magnification shots with it. That's not really what it's for. But of course, at f1.4, it has a lot of flexibility. This is a lens that I can see those that actually use mirrorless to shoot weddings, and I don't see that there's any reason with the kind of focus system that's in the A6500 and a lens like this, I don't see why you couldn't do something like shooting weddings. So as you can see, autofocus is nice and quick there, so I don't see why you couldn't use that in a wedding type application. And so really a lot going for this lens in terms of the build. Everything is nice, and the addition of some weather sealing is nice since with, for example, this A6500, it does have some weather sealing in the body itself, and so this is a combination that still feels nicely balanced to me, and I'm looking forward to trying this lens out. And of course, added bonus here is that since the image stabilizer is built into the camera body, I've basically got an image stabilized lens as a result, so that's also a bonus there. Finally, just to note, this new lens, the older lens clocked in at $339 for it. This new lens clocks in at $449, so it's grown in price, but for an autofocusing wide-angle maximum aperture f1.4 lens, that's still a pretty reasonable price for this lens, and if the performance lives up to it, it could prove to be quite an excellent value. So as you can see, there's a lot to be excited about here. And of course, I am, in many ways, one of the things I'm most excited about is that the beginnings of some weather sealing on a lens like this, and of course, a wide aperture, wide angle lens like this, that's a very intriguing attribute there, because this is the kind of lens you're going to want to use, maybe in shooting landscapes. I'm also hoping to get an opportunity to shoot some stars with it, and that may not happen. My first review cycle with the lens is is really brief because it's needed for other things right now. And so looking at the weather report, the report is not good as far as astrophotography, but I hope to be able to report back to you at some point, as there's probably a fair possibility that this lens will end up in my own personal kit at some point. I've really gotten a lot of use out of the 30 millimeter. And so I'll continue to bring you more information. Here are some early photos that you can take a peek at, and it certainly seems to have a lot of optical chops. But of course, I'll be reporting to you with more definite information on that as we move ahead. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, I do have an image gallery started, and you can begin to see the images that I'm posting there, and check back frequently, as I'll be adding to it as I continue through this review process. You can also find some early buying links for it there. You can follow me on social media, become one of my patrons. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.